you hear this saying a lot. You'll never get rich working for somebody else. So
Mhm.
my question for you is that true, and why or why not?
I mean, there's definitely some people at Google who've made hundreds of millions of dollars working for somebody else. But the reason it's not true is because of the leverage that exists in negotiations between employers and employees. So taking a step back, I was an economics major at Vanderbilt, not because I was interested in economics, but because my dad was an economics major and it just allowed me to defer deciding what I wanted to do when I was a grown up. So
Right.
economics. But one thing that we talked about in economics is a concept called a monopsony. Now, most people know what a monopoly is. Most people kind of understand that Comcast is basically a monopoly. You don't like dealing with them. If you ask people, who do you hate dealing with as a customer the most? They're going to list airlines. They're going to list Comcast, telecom companies. They're going to list companies that exist in industries with minimal competition.
Mm-hmm.
The reason they hate dealing with them is because you don't really have that many choices. And if you don't have that many choices, kind of take it or leave it. What people don't realize is most employment relationships are the inverse of that, what's called a monopsony. A monopsony is when there is one buyer for many sellers, whereas a monopoly is there's one seller for many buyers.
Mm.
But the leverage dynamic is the same. If there's one buyer, the employer, and there's many sellers, the employees who are selling their labor, the employees can't really get much leverage over that employer. And so what ends up happening is, especially large employers, they start to commoditize their workforce. So they want to, they'll tell you, oh, we care about everybody. We will reward you for hard work. At the same time, they're constructing their organization like Legoland. They want as many interchangeable parts as possible, and they will reward you and steer you towards making yourself interchangeable, right? The more willing you are to sacrifice your ability to negotiate with them, the more likely you are to be put in a position to continue to get promoted and quote unquote succeed and climb up the corporate ladder. But what ends up happening is, if you're frustrated with how your employer throws mandates on you, too bad. You can go find another one, but you don't have the opportunity that, say, an influencer does, where, I'm still dependent on others, right? So that doesn't change, because if I don't have customers, I can't sell anything. But there's one of me and there's thousands of them. So if I don't like the way one customer is treating me, I can just say, screw off. I don't need, am I going to lose 0.1% of my revenue? Okay, bye. Whereas if I had revenue concentration, if one customer amounted to 60% of my revenue or 100% of my revenue, in the case of a full-time employee, it's much harder to tell people to get lost. Yeah. And that is what a lot of people don't even realize about their work relationship, because they've never known it any other way, right? But once you realize that basic economic frameworks are structured to disadvantage you, and you can see market dynamics, which 98% of people cannot, you realize that most decisions that people make and they think are like completely normal are actually terrible. And some decisions that don't make sense to a lot of people are actually pretty sensible.
So employers are generally trying to squeeze as much value as they can out of individuals, and perhaps the process of negotiating promotions or salary raises, that's all designed to keep the employee satisfied with incremental increases, but it's not really paying them for what they're worth. Is that generally true?
Yeah, you get paid as an employee, as a non-senior executive employee, you get paid for your replacement cost. So if you do a really good job, what they will tend to do is they'll stack rank their employees. And for simplicity's sake, let's just say they have 100 employees, all of whom are junior. You keep the senior executives in a separate bucket for now. If the junior employee does really well, what they do is they say, okay, we're going to bonus you at the top of the band. So there's 10 people in your cohort. You're going to get the highest bonus of all those 10. That bonus is going to be 30% of what your base salary is. Your base salary is determined by your replacement cost. So they'll take labor surveys around your geographic location. They say, okay, software engineer with 2 to 4 years of experience. The 50th percentile wage is 120,000. The 80th percentile wage is 180,000. The 97th percentile wage is 230,000. And so the company just decides, okay, which percentile do we want to compensate our employees in? and they're going to factor in churn and all these other things, cost of training, lawsuits probably to determine what they want to pay. And then if you end up doing well, you only get a portion of what that replacement wage is. So this might not make sense for a lot of people who haven't thought deeply about it, but the way that you hit home runs in life is you do something that ends up being 30 times better than the next alternative, right? So that's how you get rich, is you have an idea and it ends up working 30 times better than the alternative and you get paid out for it. But as an employee, you can't capture upside exponentially. So if you end up, say, creating Gmail, or you end up creating a new product for your company that makes them millions of dollars, you're not going to get a percentage of the millions that they give you. You're going to get a percentage of your replacement cost. So it's weighted by your cost of replacement rather than the revenue that you produce or add to the company. And because of that, you will never, almost certainly never, become wealthy working for somebody else unless you happen to get some equity that ends up, turning into something valuable. But even most people in those situations get very, very negligible equity. And so, unless you're working for an Uber or a Google, you're getting paid in hopes and dreams.
Wow. That is a completely different way for me of understanding how work works, your replacement cost. Generally, people like to believe that they're being paid for what their value is worth in the local market.
Well, that's what you tell people when you want them to work hard and be loyal to you.
Yeah.
But it's not true.
It's not true. Wow. It also explains all right. So I was operating under this assumption that perhaps your labor is compensated at a market rate according to your value, to the value you produce for the company. And if it is perhaps slightly unfair that corporations would kind of squeeze as much value as they can out of you, if that is true, why do you see so much rent-seeking behavior? I mean, I've often been in positions where I can notice people are not really adding to the company. They're still drawing a paycheck, but maybe it's like the Pareto distribution. Like, you see a lot of people on any given staff not doing much, but then there's like maybe a smaller percentage that are creating a lot more value.
Well, it's because companies don't actually know who's doing what, and they won't compensate people in outsized fashion for being in the 10 or 20% who actually produce. So this is true in my experience at most companies. Most of the work is done by 5 to 20% of people.
Yeah.
But and I would say 50% or more of the value added is added by 5 to 20% of people. Now, if you took too many economics classes in college, you might believe that those 5 to 20% of employees who are producing 8 times their population in terms of value, and you're adding 50%, but you're only 10%, maybe 5 times your value, you would think, okay, those guys are getting paid 5 times more than everybody else. No, they're not.
It's the replacement cost.
They're getting paid 20% more. So if you have a corporate job and you realize, like, if I bust my ass, make millions for the company, they're going to pay me 20% more, or I can just figure out how to get by and draw my paycheck without working too hard, what is the most rational choice to make, right? And why do you think companies like hiring insecure people? Companies like hiring capable, insecure people, because those are kind of the only people who are going to work hard when they're not financially incentivized to. Right? So corporations will recruit very similarly to street gangs. Street gangs look for capable, insecure people to do their bidding, because they don't want to get in trouble. So they just rather get a capable, insecure kid to commit the felonies and they can keep the loot. Right? Well, it's the same thing. That's how corporations work, is they want that guy who got straight A's. They want that guy who needs to be the best. And then if they can define what best is, if the mind is young and impressionable and the employer can define what best is for that employee, then they own him. And the goal is just to replicate slavery, but in a 21st century model. And so all sorts of mind games are understood by the human resources department that typically reports to the CFO, and they use these to fulfill their duties of minimizing the cost associated with employment. That's what HR is built for.